So what a great honor to be on the lands of the Musqueam, Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, and Tsawwassen First Nations. Especially symbolic that today is January 31st, 2013, and 148 years ago, in a city called Washington, the House of Representatives in the United States passed the 13th Amendment to the Constitution and ended slavery. "148 years later, somewhere north of the border, Canada has the same opportunity to end what is nothing less than racial discrimination against First Nations children, and for the first time in our history, make us all proud to sing, "O Canada, we stand on guard for thee." And if the government won't do it, the people will. And we will do it with love and light, because only love and light can defeat the darkness. Maria asked the Prime Minister, she's 5 years old, she said, "Why are you treating kids this way?" You know, a lot of us, there's a saying that it's so easy the children can get it. Well, the children get it. But it's sadly, and I mean no offense to those of you in political circles, but you're still catching up to Maria. She learned that First Nations children in Canada do not get the same levels of funding for child welfare, education, and health care as all other Canadian children. And she may not understand the politics, but children are experts in love and fairness. And they understand when something is wrong, and they understand when something needs to be fixed to make it right. And they don't strike committees. They don't even create organizations. They do something that matters, they speak up, and they send valentines to the Prime Minister. Now, we'll get to that in a minute. Now, what Maria knows, and many Canadians are just becoming to understand, is that as a part of colonization, provincial and territorial laws in child welfare, education, and health have been imposed on First Nations. And that in itself is an issue of controversy. Because I think, as many of us can say in this room, those laws have not served First Nations children very well. And in fact, in many cases, there's very little evidence to say that they support any child particularly well. And yet they're imposed on these governments. But the services are funded by the federal government on reserve and funded by the provinces and territories for all others. And as the Auditor General of Canada, the Standing Committee on Public Accounts, and so many reports I can't even count, have said, First Nations children get far less than every other Canadian child, and yet they're judged by many Canadians who don't know as if they get more. As if they get more. Now, what does it mean to be one of these children? Well, 1 in every 6 First Nations communities in this country, you can't even go and turn on a tap and get a clean glass of water. So many of us are doing advocacy work for children in third world countries to build wells while we need them here. You can't get a clean glass of water in a country like Canada. You don't have electricity. Things like sewer are considered to be luxuries. And these types of conditions have consisted for decades. And why has it just been going on when evidence-based solutions are available to address it? These aren't unsolvable problems. They're problems where First Nations peoples, for decades before me and have worked with me, and many others, have developed solutions with the government to redress it. But regardless of the surplus budget of the government or the financial situation, and regardless of the political parties in power, it's been more easier for our governments to implement racial discrimination against children than it has to step up to the plate and stand on guard for the fundamental values that describe us as human beings and should describe the country of Canada. Childhood is a sacred time. It's a time when children develop physically, emotionally, spiritually, and cognitively. And while there's no doubt that children learn a great deal in school, as James Baldwin said, they learn a great deal from watching us too. And what are we teaching them by standing on the sidelines where hundreds of thousands of First Nations children are getting less because of who they are? What are we teaching children like Maria? What are we saying to her when we look the other way? When we say we got to wait till next year's budget, or that we're doing everything we can, and when she glances her eyes over at the other children, she sees them still suffering? And what are we teaching the First Nations kids who are being left behind? We, as a country, provincial, territorial, and federal governments, have created a Noah's Ark type of policy for public policy for First Nations children. Good for the kids who get on the boat, not so nice for those who are left behind. And what does it feel like to be left behind? You know, David is one of those children. He's a First Nations boy, and he lived on reserve and now lives in the city. And he wrote a letter to the Prime Minister telling him what it's like to live on a reserve community. He said, cold. There are no sidewalks and lots of people who drink alcohol. There's no dog pound, so dogs run around with rabies and bite little kids. Wolves are around the town. We have a school, but kids are fighting, sleeping. We don't learn. We have no dentist. We have many power outages in the winter. Lots of people don't have jobs, and some people do bad things. Little kids run away from home. My community needs help. We need police, and we need doctors, and we need new teachers and a cafeteria. Love, David. Surely those are things that a wealthy country like ours could provide without question. If we can afford to fly the Prime Minister's car to India for $1 million, we can afford to provide water, nutritious food, and good housing for every child in this country. There's no excuse for it. And this has been made possible because we've been too quiet. Some of us have talked to the government. I was among them. I remember my early days. Some of you remember me a few decades ago. You can tell all the stories around your tables about what I'm really like. But you see, for decades, I made a big mistake. I believed that if we sat across the table with the government and we proved the inequality, and more than that, we showed the harms to kids, and then we took that next step and developed solutions, because I'm not about criticizing unless we have a solution. So we work around the evidence-based solutions. And we develop those solutions in ways that can be enforceable and implemented by the federal government. That they would have the moral fortitude to do the right thing. I did that not once with the company of so many others, but I did it again. Because the first time we did it, I thought, well, maybe they weren't convinced enough. Maybe we needed to have better evidence, more people, to show what was happening to the kids. We released that second report in 2005. Doing the right thing for First Nations children would have cost less than 1% of the surplus budget, and the government walked away from it. You see, for too long, I believed that the government was logical and moral. And I've come to understand that that's not true. And yet, too often, that's the way we respond to them. And the problem with that, of course, is that children are growing up in the meantime. While we're sitting at those tables, and we have the answers that could make their lives better, and they're not changing anything, then we must do something different. We must, with all of our example, have the courage to stand up for kids like David who are growing up right now. And one of the children who inspired me and taught me a lot about courage is Shannon. Shannon comes from the Attawapiskat First Nation. Many of you heard about it in the news. You've seen all kinds of headlines about Attawapiskat, but you haven't heard this. It's a community with one source of potable water. I've been up there. There's people living in tents and shacks. You've all seen it. But what you may not know is that community raised one of the 45 kids in the world to be nominated for the International Children's Peace Prize given out by the Nobel laureates. The people who call us to be better than who we think we can be as people. The people who call us as a country to be the country of our children's dreams more often come from places of despair than they do from places of privilege. Because they value the basic things that often define us the most because they've been denied them. Shannon just wanted to go to school. In 2000, in her community, she was 5 years old. She was on her way to kindergarten, but the only school was closed because 30,000 gallons of diesel fuel had leaked beneath the school over the previous 20 years, making the kids sick. The government of Canada said, oh, no problem. These aren't no health problems. Don't worry about the nausea and everything else you're feeling. There's no problem here. But eventually, an environmental health assessor came up and found out that this was a Class 1 toxic waste dump. So contaminated that many of the belongings in the school had to remain there. And the government of Canada put portable trailers on the playground of that contaminated school. It was supposed to be temporary. Where little Shannon would have gone to kindergarten is no further from me to the back wall, separated by only a chain-length fence. Well, Shannon is a Cree girl, and her first language is Cree and her second is English. And she was brought up to respect leaders. And that's what broke the kids' hearts the most. You see, 3 ministers of Indian Affairs across 2 political parties the kids a new school and never delivered. How is it that leaders don't keep their promises to kids? They wondered why they wouldn't do that. Why don't they want them to have a new school? Maybe they wondered, they think it's okay the way it is. You see, the portable trailers were getting so run down over time that the kids would have to wear their parkas inside of the classroom because the temperatures would plummet below 0. There was rat infestations. There is black mold contamination. As Shannon would tell us later, children were dropping out in grade 5 because of lack of hope. And layered on top of all of that is the inequality in education funding. I find amongst many Canadians the one thing that there's a big stereotype is that First Nations get a free post-secondary education. I have 3 degrees from 3 different provinces and 3 different universities, and I've got nothing from the federal government. So I'm thinking I'm into one heck of a rebate if that actually is true. But what many Canadians don't understand is that elementary and secondary students get about $2,000 to $3,000 less per student every year for education funding. And what that translates into is less money for teachers. There's no money in the Indian Affairs funding formula for libraries. There's also no money for computers. Who here thinks they could be doing the job that they're doing today without having gone to a school where there was no library and no computers? And then what we see are these job postings for Aboriginal students saying, you know, we want more Aboriginal youth in the workplace, but they're still doing nothing about this inequality. Well, Shannon was in grade 8. She'd made it that far. And she was thinking about the people down in Ottawa. And despite everything, she believed in the goodness of their hearts. It must be, she thought, that they don't know how bad it is up here. So I'm going to organize all the other kids, and we're going to take videos and pictures, and we're going to write letters to the Prime Minister and to the Minister. And so it was that the mailbags filled up. But it didn't do anything. CBC did a documentary called The Forgotten Children of Attawapiskat, and the pages turned in the media, and that was the end of it. So Shannon thought, again, maybe if the non-Aboriginal children wrote letters, that would make a difference. And so she made a YouTube video on one of the few computers that worked up in Attawapiskat, and she sent it out to the world. And she wondered if anyone would ever write back. Well, one of the kids that heard her message is a young boy named Harry. He's from Ottawa. And he writes a letter, and he says, "Dear Prime Minister Harper, do you have a cat?" "I have a cat. His name is Micah, after the rock. He's a boy and he's black." And then he gets right down to business. And everybody here I read some dissertations from doctoral students. This one is probably the best one I've ever read. And it's shorter, too. He says, Stephen Harper, listen to me. If you do not build more schools, you're going to create a crime wave and lose all of your money. Because kids who can't go to school can't get jobs. And they're still going to need money, so some of them are going to have to steal it. And then people in the community are going to get mad because crooks are invading your homes. And since you're in charge, you're going to have to fix this. So you better man up and build more schools. Love, Harry. And he wasn't the only one. Thousands of kids joined in and wrote letters, and the mailbags filled up at Indian Affairs, but that still did not turn the hearts down there to one of equality. Halfway through Shannon's grade 8 year, a letter arrives from the Minister of Indian Affairs, and it says, we're sorry, but we cannot afford a school for you. We cannot afford a school for you. So the 13-year-olds, you see, this is a little tip. I've got some baggage from having grown up in remote places in British Columbia. And I just want to unleash this all on you. Because those of us who grow up in rural and remote places do not want to go to camp. Are you with me? Now, this may never have occurred to those of you who live in a city, but especially, I need to stand up for the girls for a minute. We want to go to the mall, right? Take us to the IMAX. I could teach these people, these camp counselors, about the trees up in northern British Columbia. And these kids were no different. They had fundraised enough money to go to Niagara Falls. And think about it for a moment, what getting to grade 8 in those conditions was like, what a celebration that was. But the teenagers met by themselves, a 13-year-old, and one of the boys, Chris, says, I don't think we should go on that trip. I think we should cancel it. And we should use the money to send 3 of us down to meet with the Minister of Indian Affairs to get a new school for the kids. And so it was done. Shannon Kustachin ends at the doorstep of the Minister of Indian Affairs in June of 2010. She's 13 years old, and she had driven by Carleton University on her way there. And she thought, that's where I want to go one day. I want to be a lawyer. And that's what makes this meeting so important. Because no matter what your dreams are, you should have a right to be able to dream and make sure that you can get there. In the Globe and Mail quote of the week later, she said, I think the minister was nervous. Because one of the first comments he makes is, I have to say this, like some of the politicians are very engaging, but some of them social skills, I think, are a little work. The first thing he says is kind of points out how nice and big his office is. And so Shannon says that, yeah, it is really nice. I wish it was this warm and big for those of us who are trying to learn up in Attawapiskat. And, the kids by this time were pretty skeptical because one of the reasons that the government said at the time that it was not going to provide a new school, listen to this one, is that there were 29 other schools in worse condition than that one. That was in the news. It's kind of like, don't look at this contaminated waste dump. We got 29 others that we're dealing with over here, and that should be okay. I think the members of Parliament should go to those 29 schools for a month, and we'll see how they wake up. I think it would make a difference. Shannon said, I looked the minister in the eye, and I could tell he was nervous. He starts looking at his watch. That's what ministers do. And by the way, politicians, we already know these signs already, right? It's not a single language. It's kind of like you have them there for the ribbon-cutting ceremony, and then they're looking at their watch, you know what they say. You give them the gift, and they're off, right? So Shannon had already picked this up, and she said, are you going to give us a school or not? And he said, no, we can't afford it. And so she stood up, and she put her hand out to him, and she said, Minister, I want to thank you for meeting with us today, but I will never give up because school is a time for dreams, and every kid deserves this. 2 hours later, she was on the House of Parliament on the steps there, and she promised the world what she had promised the minister. At the age of 13, she loved her family and her community. But if she stayed on in high school, underfunded high school in Attawapiskat, she would graduate with a grade 10 equivalency, even though she'd get the grade 12 diploma because of the underfunding of schools. So the only way she could go to high school was to go hundreds of miles away from her community to New Liskeard. That was the first time she ever stood in a hallway of a proper school. It was a run-down school. One of the schools that you might think needs to be replaced. And she finds herself into a classroom, and she's touching all of the old books and all of the things that are there for learning, and tears came down her face. And when she was asked what was wrong, she said, "Oh, I wish I had my life to live over again so I could go to a school as nice as this." She went on to talk to anyone who would listen. She went to talk to the labor community, who were so supportive of her and her sister from the very beginning. She would talk to people of different faith communities. She would talk to students. She held a conference with the other kids of Attawapiskat for 500 non-Aboriginal kids in Toronto to teach them to stand up for what counts and what their rights are. But somewhere on the road, in June 1st of 2010, on her way to school, Shannon Kustachin talked to her sister, Serena. She said, "Hi ho, Miss Day. Hi ho, Miss Day," which in Cree means I love you very much, and I'll see you soon. And we lost Shannon Kustachin in a car accident on her way to school that night. But the thousands of kids that she had inspired created a Facebook page to memorialize this great leader and to pledge to continue her work. They called it Shannon's Dream. And they said they would never give up because they had learned from Shannon that you have to stand up for what you believe in and what's right. And see, Shannon had learned that that wasn't the only school in bad condition. You have First Nation schools here in BC contaminated with black mold. You have every student in British Columbia who's not getting the education that he or she deserves because of who they are. Think about it for a moment. No amount of pulling yourself up by the bootstraps will give you the rights that you enjoy. Imagine what that feels like as a child and what that would feel like as a parent. It's happening right now in this country. And so the kids have been taking up Shannon's words, and they have been writing letters to the Parliament. And they wrote a book. They had some letters to the Prime Minister, and this was in 2011. It was right on the election campaign. And one thing I've come to understand is that there's nothing more scary to politicians who don't want to make change than kids with a sign. Except for kids with a sign and a microphone. And there's tourists on Parliament Hill. Now, the kids had actually built a school on a radio flyer wagon, and they towed it all the way up to Parliament Hill. And when I asked the kids why they built a school at paper mache, the girls said, well, we had read Canadian Geographic magazine, and they said they built 75 schools in Afghanistan, and that's good, but we don't understand why they can't build one up in Attawapiskat. Why can't they build one up there? So we decided we would show them that you can do this. We did this in an afternoon. It's not that hard. So we figured that the government can do it. And they got up there with their letters. Now, as far as I know, none of these kids are members of the Conservative Party, or the Liberals, or the NDP, or the Green Party, or any other party. But they are part of a bigger community, one that believes in fairness, one that believes in equality, and one that doesn't understand why their own country would leave a generation of kids behind. And so they had some letters for the Prime Minister, and they step up to the block. One of them is Bethany, and she says, "Dear Prime Minister Harper." See, they're writing their letters to him because they understand that he's in charge, right? Prime Minister Harper, I think you should go back to grade 5. Because that's where you're going to learn about the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. And if you read that thing, you would know what kids in kindergarten already know in my school. And that is that you got to treat people fair. And a little grade 2 girl gets up. She's got the beautiful curly hair. She stands up there and she says, one day I'm going to be Prime Minister of Canada. And I can dream that and I can be that because I go to a good school. But a First Nations child might want to be Prime Minister too. But you're not helping make that happen. And I don't think that's right. And I don't want to grow up in a country where we all don't have the chance to dream to be the Prime Minister and be able to do it. Now, then there's Elliot. He gets up there and he says, Dear Prime Minister Harper, I do not understand why you're over in China talking to them about their human rights when you seem to have lots of problems back here. Maybe you should get on a plane and come home. Because there's lots of kids here who need you. And the letters have been piling up by the thousands, you see, because children don't just stand on the sidelines, as our eloquent young woman who walked onto Vancouver Island has shared with us. It's not a time for words, it's a time for action. Now, the inequalities that we see in education, they do not just end there. And they have been made possible by something I called incremental equality. It is something that's worked against us as caring people of the country and as First Nations. Because what happens is that the inequality is so huge that on a good year, the government will announce some money for it. And then a taxpayer hears next year that their First Nations are unhappy and they want more money. So it's kind of like, aren't they ever satisfied? Don't they, like we're being so generous and they are not appreciating it. And then there comes the whole question of financial mismanagement. In the spirit of full disclosure, I drive a 2006 Civic, so let's just get that out of the way. But there's this, and financial accountability with children's dollars is important. All of us would agree with that. Our accountant friend who is doing the fundraising would particularly agree with that, and I do too. But financial mismanagement is not a cultural stereotype. If it was, then I think you would agree with me that I don't know how many of you were getting your retirement savings statements in 2008 and saw them plummeting towards the ground. And then when I turned on CNN, I saw a cast of characters who are all white middle-aged men who are CEOs and responsible for all of this. So if it is a particular cultural stereotype, then I think our next campaign has to be about banning these people from ever running a company. Last year I was reading a report. It said, can anyone hazard a guess as to what year or what century real progress will be made towards the equality of Indian children? That was written in 1967. I was 3 years old, and kids like Shannon are still waiting. That's the problem with incremental equality. And no matter what the Prime Minister says he's doing enough, he is not doing enough. Equality is the floor for First Nations children. It is not the ceiling, and we must all demand that. It is not, I'm not going to stand up for any kind of photo ops where First Nations kids just get an inch down the path while other children are further ahead. It is not fair, it is un-Canadian, and it's absolutely unacceptable. Kids don't know why it's taken us so long to fix this. Cassidy said, if there's a problem in our school, you'd fix it right away. But you won't give the Native children a proper school. Do you really think this is right? If a 10-year-old girl can see that this is not right, why can't you? The children on Native reserves are just like any other Canadian child, but they're not being treated like that. So many people have realized the problem, and I'm very surprised that you're not one of them. You are breaking the Charter of Rights, and Canadians help write it. And in the Charter, it clearly states that every Canadian gets the same rights, but that's not happening. I feel ashamed to say I'm Canadian, and I will until you fix this. So many children are not getting a good education. In 2007, the government apologized, but you didn't do anything more, and that doesn't fix anything. Love, Cassidy. You notice how kids already sign their letters love? That's because they understand that love and light are the only way to overcome darkness. It's sometimes something that we forget about as we get older. The inequities in education echo across health and child welfare. And it is astounding to me, really, that on February 25th of this year, I will enter into the Canadian Human Rights Tribunal room, where the Canadian government will be on trial to face allegations that it's racially discriminating against First Nations children in child welfare. I don't know how to feel. Part of me feels that justice is coming and this is what must be done because we had 2 evidence-based solutions and they walked away from both of them. We have their own documents, and by the way, British Columbia has the lowest level of First Nations child welfare funding of any other region in the country with the exception of New Brunswick and Newfoundland. They shortchange BC First Nations kids to a greater degree than they do other kids, and it's not because they're less needy, it's because of the arbitrary nature of the way that the government does business. Now, I remember in 2007, and I walked out of the news conference with Phil Fontaine, National Chief. We had just announced that we had filed this complaint. And there were about 20 supporters who had flown in for the news conference. And then I walked out into Parliament. It was February 27th. It was a beautiful day. And there was nobody there. Not one person had come. And I wondered, is it that they don't care? Is it that really Canadians don't care? That they think we deserve it? The kids deserve it? That they're doing enough and they're being too generous? But I knew none of those things were true. I knew that just like Shannon, that Canadians are good people. And that if they knew what was happening in this country, they would be standing with us because they would know that it's not just about First Nations children. This very question of discriminating against kids goes to the very heart and soul of our conscience of our nation. So we created a campaign called I Am a Witness, where we load up all of Canada's court documents and we load up all of our documents. And we don't ask you to take a side, we just ask you to watch. And if you had been watching in those early days, you would have found that the government spent $3.1 million in 5 years trying to derail this complaint on legal technicalities, because they did not want to have a full hearing on the facts. But I want to say a huge thank you to Stikeman Elliott, who have been giving us pro bono legal services, and along with Paul Champ and the Canadian Human Rights Commission, we are finally going to have the day of reckoning for the children on February 25th, but it's not because of Canada. It's not because of Canada. Now, something's changed. We're no longer standing alone. You see, those kids with Shannon's dream, well, they decided to come to court. And I remember the first youth who showed up. As a young man told me, he said, "We're from alternative school, which means we get into trouble a lot." And I thought, good, because so do I. I get into trouble a lot, too. I tend not to have the problem that First Call does. You know, First Call saying that they're so pleased to have so many government officials at your gathering. I find I don't have that problem at all. In fact, I find them in all kinds of places. So, but back to this. So, what are we going to do as a country about this? The government is trying to get off it on legal technicalities, and they will do that again. The youth say that. And he was wondering what he might do too, but he said, you know, look, sometimes we deserve being in trouble. But a lot of times it's the systems, and no one ever holds them accountable. And this is the first time we've ever seen someone do it, and we're going to be here for every hearing. And those kids have come back now, they're young men and women, through every hearing. And not only that, on February 14th last year, when Canada on its most recent attempt to drill out the case on legal technicalities, we had to move the hearing to the Supreme Court of Canada because there were 200 children who wanted to watch. 200 kids. Now, Canada's up there and is trying to get the case dismissed on this legal technicality, and I was even getting lost in the legal mumbo-jumbo. Now, imagine yourself as a government of Canada. You're arguing these legal technicalities, but you're having to do it in front of 5-year-olds. Now, your only hope is that they don't understand anything. So I go out during the break. I mean, I have to say, you know, didn't understand everything that was going on in that room. And there's a little guy there. They'd spent all morning with their best lawyers, and those lawyers are trying to do a good job. They're just trying to do their job that the government has given them. We can't lose sight of the fact that they get instructions. And there's a little guy there, and he says, "Oh, come on over, I want to show you something." And he had a paper. He had a line down the center of the page, and on the left-hand side, there was all these tally marks, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, whole list. And on the other side, a shorter list. He says, "Do you know what this is?" And I said, "No." He said, "Well, the long list is when the judge asks the Canada people a question, and the short list is when they answered." So he's coming back with his scorecard. He wants to see how they make out at the tribunal. Meanwhile, you can see how intimidating I am. And I never thought I'd be this popular with bureaucrats. But I have to say how shocked I really was. Because again, I grew up with this naive belief that in a democratic society, you could propose an evidence-based issue and have a good democratic debate and even hold your government accountable. And then I found a bunch of documents. And how did I come up on the documents? Well, I went to a meeting as a technical aide with the Chiefs of Ontario. I was invited there to provide advice on child welfare. This was in 2009. It was a couple of years after we had filed the case. And by the way, within 30 days, we lost all of our core funding, and we're one of the few organizations that doesn't get any federal funding up until today. We're actually almost the biggest number of donors that we have are from children themselves, who are having lemonade stands and piggy bank donations. So that kids own the Caring Society, which I think is a good thing. You know, it's a good thing. But I get up there, and they make it very clear that they're unwilling to have a meeting if I'm in the room about First Nations funding. And they also call a security guard to guard me. Now, at first, I don't even think he's there for me, but then I realize I'm the only one in the room that he could be guarding. Now, thankfully, you know, sometimes I think this case is spiritually guided, because there happened to be a newspaper there, and I was reading it, and it showed, it was an article where I was criticizing the government on its child welfare policy. So I kind of thought, well, that's kind of ironic. Here I am reading an article where I'm criticizing them, and they're guarding me with a security guard. So I wanted to know what it is about me that would require a security guard and the banning out of a meeting. And I got thousands of pages of documents. Some of you heard me on CBC The Current on June 17, 2011. And what I was saying there is that I had found records where there are bureaucrats following me to different talks and taking notes. Not just one talk, but tens and tens of talks, even as far away as in Australia. That there were records that they had pulled my Status Indian Registry file and seen the names of all my families for reasons that I do not know. And there were copies of my personal Facebook and Twitter accounts. There were mentions of the child welfare case, but it wasn't clear in that first set of documents that it was completely tied. So I did a second request after I was on CBC, and thankfully that got their attention inside of government, and they actually started sending quite a few emails. It eventually ended up being very helpful to me. And one of the emails is to Aboriginal Affairs officials, where they write something along the lines of, "We applied to monitor her personal Facebook and Twitter pages for a period of 6 months, but we gave up after we realized the Department of Justice was also doing it, so we could just share." And I'm thinking as a taxpayer, well, at least I'm glad about that. And then there's another email that says that the reason that we're doing this is to find other motives for the child welfare case. There's also evidence that they pulled my Indian registry on the very day I was on CBC The Current, for reasons I do not understand. What other reason would you possibly, I mean, it's quite a coincidence to have my Indian registry pulled on the very same day I'm on CBC The Current. Now, what do you do with that stuff? To me, it's about, again, being taught by the likes of Shannon and many others, is that that's part of the process, is that we have to be prepared for that kind of pushback. And the way to respond to it is to not reciprocate. I will not release the names of those hundreds of bureaucrats who have been following me around, because to do so would be to actually violate the various the privacy rights that I want to stand up for. And the other thing is that you need to stand up for the values in ways that make the kids proud, that make them proud. But you can never be silent, and it's tempting. Because when I saw that level of monitoring, I made a lot of jokes about it, because that's how I get through things. I laugh a lot. I told my nephew, who lives with me, I said, if you see any moving bushes out there, it may not be your hallucination. And my mother is 74 years old. I went to see her in Prince George. That's where one of the places where I grew up. And we have a veranda, an old 70s house with a veranda, you know. And my mom has a Chihuahua named Rosa. And usually when I go up there, Rosa and my mom are out there to greet me from the car. But that didn't happen after I was on CBC The Current. The house looked like there was nobody home. So I go up to the door, and I was actually just going to ring the bell. I thought, well, maybe she's gone out. And the door opens just a crack, and there's my mom with a hat and dark sunglasses. She looks to the left, and she looks to the right, and she pulls me in. But to be honest, you wonder, what is most scary about this is you wonder what else they're up to. I don't know if they've monitored my phones or if they've monitored the meetings of my family. I have no idea. But I do know this, is that I will not remain silent. That it is up to every one of us to absolutely speak the truth, and to do so regardless of what government's position may be on it. And whatever the consequences, let them come. Because I want this to be a country that our kids can feel proud of. I want this to be a place where First Nations children's dream matters, where they can grow up to feel proud of who they are. And I'm not going to let a little Facebook spying to get in the way of that. But we haven't always been courageous, have we? Sometimes we worry if we speak up with government that they'll cut their funding, so we're quiet. Or we think if we play ball one more round that things will change with kids. Well, sometimes that's okay. But a lot of times we go decades thinking that same thing, and we leave kids at the background. You know, James Baldwin said, kids don't always listen to their elders, but they never fail to imitate them. So it is in our actions that we decide what kind of country we want Canada to be. And as a young child, Gabriel knows what researchers around the world have already known. She said, when I learned about the discrimination against First Nations people, I cried. I thought Canada was a free country where everybody was accepted. Until a few months ago, I learned that First Nations were not accepted. If you don't want to do this for them, if you don't want to help for them, do it for our generation of young people, because we'll be more at ease knowing everybody is being treated equally. And how can you help? Well, you can sign on to Shannon's Dream. You can sign on to the I Am a Witness campaign. And you can join the kids this February 14th and send Valentines to the Prime Minister. You can send Valentines to the Prime Minister and to your elected officials. Because the provinces, honestly, don't have clean hands in this either. The province of British Columbia knows that children are being underfunded in child welfare, and they're doing nothing about it, other than passing the buck to the feds. And the bottom line is, that is not in line with their rights as children, and it's unacceptable. And in the next election, you should all say, top drawer issue. If you cannot treat children equitably, you do not belong in the legislature building in British Columbia, bar none. That's it. Out. "50 years from now," or maybe that later, because I'll be dead 50 years from now. I'm that old now. A number of years from now, your grandchildren will be sitting with you, and they'll ask you, did you know what was happening to First Nations children in 2013? Were you there when that court case happened? And you did. And was there something that you could have done about it? And yes, there was. And was it hard to do? No. It takes 2 minutes, and it's completely free. You don't even need a stamp for a Member of Parliament letter. And even the kids are showing you how to do it. And did you do anything? That's the page in your own family's history that you will be writing, but it's not just a page in your own family's history. It is a page on the conscience of the nation. It is about the type of Canada we want our kids to grow up in, and the type of Canada we all want to leave the world in. When we sing those lines, "O Canada, we stand on guard for thee," it means more than wearing poppies on November 11th. It means standing up for those values every single day of the year. The greatest human rights abuses in this country have all been perpetrated by the Canadian government. The internment of Japanese Canadians, the Chinese head tax, the turning away of Jewish persons during the Second World War and residential schools, and now this, and many others. They've been made possible because we as caring Canadians felt it was unpatriotic to stand up for equality. The children know that the most patriotic thing you can do is stand up for equality and fairness. So follow their example. This February 14th, do something that matters. And show the country, and show kids like Shannon that you are as good and great as they believe that you are, and that you care enough to lead them a country that they can all feel proud of. Thank you so much to First Call and to all of you. I got to go back to Ottawa and fight with these guys a bit.